Welcome back, listeners. Today, we're going deep, and I mean deep, into a topic that's both fascinating and, a little bit disturbing, to be honest. We're talking about young serial killers. These are the cases that really make you think twice about, that whole childhood innocence thing.
It's true, these cases really challenge our perceptions of childhood and the potential for darkness, even at a young age.
Exactly. And we're not just looking at one corner of the world, we're going global. We'll be examining cases from India, the USA, the UK.
It's fascinating to see how these cases, despite their geographic diversity, often share some unsettling commonalities.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, did you know there's a case in India, a boy named Amarjit Sada, who allegedly killed 3 people before he was even 8 years old?
Sada's case is definitely one of the most perplexing ones out there, especially considering the context. He grew up in a very poor village.
Right, I read about that.
And there were signs, even from a young age, that he seemed to, enjoy inflicting pain on others.
Oh, that's just awful. And his first 2 victims?
They were both infants, relatives, actually.
His own family.
Sadly, yes. And what's even more unsettling is that his family chose to handle these deaths internally, rather than involving the authorities.
Wait, really? They just, swept it under the rug? I mean, how was that even possible?
It's hard to fathom, isn't it? But their actions were likely influenced by a whole web of factors. Poverty, for one, limited access to any kind of resources, mental health support or otherwise, and perhaps even some cultural norms that, let's just say, prioritized family matters over legal intervention.
It's like a tragic domino effect.
Yeah.
Family's silence, their inaction, maybe it inadvertently allowed Sada's violence to escalate.
And tragically it did. His 3rd victim, a 6-month-old neighbor, lost her life.
It's just heartbreaking. A complete failure of the system, it seems. Speaking of systems, how did the Indian legal system handle a case like Sada's, a child offender that young?
It's a complex issue. India, like many countries, really struggles with juvenile justice, trying to find that delicate balance between rehabilitation and accountability.
Right.
In Sada's case, it really exposed the limitations of those systems. Ultimately, he was placed in a children's home, but the big question, the one that keeps me up at night, is what kind of long-term support and intervention does a child who commits such acts truly need? Can they ever truly be rehabilitated?
Big questions, for sure. Ones that I'm sure we'll keep coming back to as we continue this deep dive. Now let's shift gears, geographically speaking. We're heading over to the United States, where we have the chilling case of the Beaver brothers.
Ah, yes, the Beaver brothers. This one is particularly disturbing even for those of us who, spend a lot of time thinking about these kinds of cases.
It's definitely stuck with me.
Robert and Michael Beaver, they were 18 and 16, respectively, when they planned and carried out a horrific attack on their own family in Oklahoma.
Their own family?
It's almost unimaginable, I know. But that's what makes this case so unique, so unsettling. It wasn't just a random act of violence. It was meticulously planned, premeditated.
What do you mean? Like they actually sat down and planned this out?
They did. They gathered knives, a hatchet, even tactical gear, all before systematically attacking their parents and siblings.
It sounds like something out of a horror movie. The level of cold-bloodedness is just terrifying.
It is. And there's one detail in particular that sends shivers down my spine. Michael, the younger brother, he actually lured one of his younger siblings out of a room where he was hiding by pretending to be on his side.
Oh my God.
Only to then participate in the attack.
That's just evil.
Pure deception, pure evil.
So on the surface, it seemed like a normal family, but underneath, this darkness was brewing.
Exactly. And investigators believe that darkness was fueled by a fascination with violence, with death, even a twisted desire for notoriety.
It's a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that sometimes the most unsettling horrors are hiding in plain sight, right next door perhaps.
It's a chilling thought indeed, and it makes you think, about missing those warning signs, those red flags.
Yeah, you almost wonder, could anything have been done? Could someone have intervened, maybe changed the course of events?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Early intervention, that's key. But it's a delicate balance. We can't just label every kid who's, let's say, a little bit different, a little bit darker, as a potential killer.
Right, of course not.
But creating an environment where those behaviors are noticed, where people feel comfortable speaking up, that's crucial.
So open communication, right?
Exactly. And access to mental health support, that's a big one.
Yeah, absolutely. And then maybe even I don't know, taking a closer look at the media kids are consuming these days,
Yeah.
Video games, movies, all that stuff.
It all plays a role, for sure. It's a complex issue, so a one-size-fits-all approach just won't cut it.
Multifaceted, like you said.
Exactly. Now, speaking of complex cases, there's another one that I think is important to discuss. The story of Edmund Kemper, often referred to as the co-ed killer.
Oh, wow. Kemper. That's a name that sends chills down your spine. His crimes, they spanned years, didn't they?
They did, starting with the murder of his own grandparents when he was just 15.
15, that's barely a teenager.
It's a tragic example of how early trauma, how those childhood wounds can have a ripple effect throughout a person's life.
It's like a wound that never really heals,
And in Kemper's case, his relationship with his mother, it was deeply troubled, to say the least. Experts believe that this early trauma, this toxic relationship, played a significant role in his psychological development, his eventual descent into violence.
So we're seeing that link, again, that connection between childhood trauma and violent behavior.
It's a pattern we see time and time again in these cases.
A pattern we can't ignore.
Right. Trauma, particularly in childhood, it can have a profound impact on brain development, on emotional regulation, even on the formation of empathy.
It's like the foundation is cracked,
Okay.
And it impacts everything built upon it.
A powerful analogy. And while not every child who experiences trauma will become violent, of course not, studies have shown a strong correlation between early trauma and an increased risk of aggression, of criminal behavior later in life.
It's a complex issue, for sure. But understanding that link, that connection, seems crucial if we want to have any hope of breaking the cycle.
I couldn't agree more. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about James Fairweather, the Colchester killer from the UK.
Okay, I remember reading about this case. Wasn't he quite young as well?
He was only 15 when he fatally stabbed two strangers.
So young.
And what's particularly interesting about Fairweather's case is the element of mental illness. He claimed to hear voices commanding him to make sacrifices.
Wow, that's chilling.
Classic symptoms of psychosis, a severe mental illness.
But, does mental illness alone explain such violence?
It's rarely that simple, unfortunately. While mental illness can definitely contribute to a person's actions, it's crucial to remember that the vast majority of people with mental illness are not violent.
That's an important point.
In Fairweather's case, it seems like his psychosis, combined with this morbid fascination with serial killers, created a sort of a dangerous cocktail.
A recipe for disaster, almost.
It's like a perfect storm of factors, each one amplifying the other.
And speaking of morbid fascinations, the case of Alysa Bustamante, it really highlights that dark side of the human psyche. She was only 15 when she murdered her 9-year-old neighbor.
Right, and what makes Bustamante's case so unsettling is her journal.
Oh, the journal. I remember reading about that. It was filled with, disturbing stuff, to say the least.
It was. Her entries revealed a deep obsession with death, with inflicting pain, and a complete lack of remorse.
It's almost as if she was living in her own world, a world detached from reality, detached from empathy.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it, that a young mind could be so consumed by darkness?
Absolutely. It's a stark reminder that the line between fantasy and reality can be incredibly thin, especially for young people.
Now let's talk about Eric Smith. He was only 13 when he lured and brutally murdered a 4-year-old boy.
Oh, God, that case is just heartbreaking.
It is. And what's even more disturbing is his motive.
I remember reading about that. Something about the boy being blonde, right?
You're right. He said he wanted to hurt someone because they were blonde.
That's just, I don't even know what to say.
It's a case that really forces us to confront the nature of evil. Can someone be born with such a profound lack of empathy?
It's a question that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries.
And unfortunately, we may never have a definitive answer.
Now let's shift gears again. I think it's important to talk about school shootings, a phenomenon that, sadly, has become all too familiar in recent years.
It's a tragic reality, for sure.
We have TJ Lane, who killed 3 students at the age of 17, and showed absolutely no remorse, even smirking in court.
It's almost as if he was reveling in the attention and the notoriety.
A classic example of a narcissistic personality.
Right, that inflated sense of self-importance, that utter lack of empathy for others.
And then there's Nathaniel Brazil, who shot his teacher at 13 after being reprimanded. His defense argued it was an accident, but the fact remains a young boy had access to a firearm and used it with deadly consequences.
It highlights the critical issue of gun control, of the accessibility of firearms, especially to young people.
A debate that's incredibly complex, incredibly heated.
But one we can't afford to ignore.
Absolutely. And finally, there's Craig Price, the war slasher, who began his violent spree at 13.
Price's case is particularly disturbing because his violence continued even after he was incarcerated.
Making his potential release a major point of contention.
It really puts the spotlight on the challenges of rehabilitation, of balancing the needs of the offender with the safety of the public.
It's a tightrope walk, for sure. And there's no easy answer. As we've delved into these cases, I think we've seen a lot of common threads.
Oh, absolutely.
The impact of early trauma, the complexities of mental illness, the influence of societal factors.
It's like a puzzle, you know? With each case, each individual, we get a few more pieces.
But the full picture, the complete understanding, it remains elusive.
Perhaps it always will.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling the weight of all this. It's heavy stuff. These cases, they're disturbing.
It's true. It's not easy to face this kind of darkness, especially when it involves children.
It makes you question a lot of things.
But I think it's important to remember that these cases, they're thankfully rare. They're the exceptions, not the rule.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the horror,
It is. But we can't let that paralyze us. We have to focus on prevention, on understanding the risk factors.
Right, like we talked about earlier.
And promoting mental health awareness, creating communities where young people feel supported, where they can get help if they need it.
Absolutely. We can't just react to tragedy.
Right.
We have to be proactive.
Couldn't agree more.
So I guess the big question is, the one we keep coming back to is, what leads a child down such a dark path?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
And I know there's no easy answer, no single explanation.
Right. Every case is different. But we have seen some patterns emerge. Early trauma, mental health issues, a fascination with violence, a lack of empathy.
And often it's a combination of these factors, right?
Exactly, like a perfect storm brewing.
A recipe for disaster.
It's a complex puzzle, and we may never have all the pieces.
But even understanding a few of those pieces, that can make a difference.
It can. It can help us identify those at risk. It can guide us towards better interventions, better prevention strategies.
It's about creating a safety net.
A safety net for those who are struggling.
Before they fall too far.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a heavy conversation, but an important one, I think.
I agree.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us. We know this wasn't easy to listen to, but we hope it's given you something to think about, something to discuss, maybe even something to act upon.
And if you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out for help. There are resources available, people who care.
You're not alone. We'll be back soon. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, take care.